What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over animations in the first-person shooter tutorial series. So I've put the character's mesh a little bit outside of the character, that way you can see what's going on. And you can see what they do as we do different things. So if I walk, he's walking one speed. If I run, he's going a little bit faster. I can stop, he is idle. I can aim down sights, and you can see that the posture changes. I can reload, and they even reload. Now, there's no gun attached to the mesh at the current time. That is something we will need to adjust, but that will be adjusted in the next animations episode when I go over animations for the arms itself. So we have the arms separate from the character mesh right now. So that's why I put the character mesh out there, but we can still see our hands. So the mesh that I put in is the Y-bot mesh from Miximo, and I have corresponding animations. Right now, what we're seeing are a pair of arms. And that pair of arms in front of the screen here, shoots and all, I don't have animations for at the moment. So I have to get some for that. But I want to break this up anyway because we're going to separate the logic. We're going to have basically the animations and everything that this character, the blue character here, sees. This is like the character that other people will see. Or that we will see if we look in a mirror or something like that. But we still need our animations and our mesh for in front of the camera, because, you know, we don't want the blue mesh that everyone sees with the gun and all to be the best looking thing. The thing is, if this mesh is too detailed, then it's going to eat up just performance that we don't need to lose. But the mesh in front of the camera, our hands and our gun, should be very detailed because we want that to look good. And just as an example, you can look at this in pretty much any multiplayer game, but I think a good example is a game like Apex Legends. If you go and you look at another character, then you can go ahead and look at their gun, and you can recognize the skin they have by looking at them if you're familiar with the skins in the game, but it won't look quite right because there's a lot of details missing. And that's because, you know, they've basically dumbed down that model and that material to make things look better. The textures on it, everything like that. And yeah, you can see that some of the animations also don't play. Like I said, I mentioned this in another one of my first-person shooter tutorials, but the inspect weapon button does not actually play for other players unless they are watching it from your point of view. So there's reasons for all of that. And because of that, we're going to have two animation episodes. I will cover everything. Even though we're not into multiplayer yet, I think this is an important distinction to make. Because again, you can still use this for times where if you need to see yourself, if you need to do a cutscene where you see outside of the player, think of it. I mean, you're not going to want to just see arms floating in the air. We do need a mesh to be able to make cutscenes or for multiplayer, whether it's local or online. So let's start with getting a mesh in here, getting him to do the proper animations, and then next time around, we'll get the hands in front of us to do animations. Alrighty. So I have, before we get started, I have about 16, 17 of these episodes so far. So if you'd like to get caught up on the series, then I'll leave a link in this iCard in the top right corner to catch up on all the first-person shooter tutorial episodes. This will help you just kind of figure out how we got here and what you need to do to make your tutorial look like this, or your game look like this, if you're interested. And otherwise, if you're not, that's perfectly fine. But I will leave a link right here in this iCard to how to import Miximo models and animations, which is what I have here today. This blue Y-bot, as it's called, is a Miximo model, and the animations that are playing on it are Miximo animations. So they're free animations you can use for commercial use or just creative use. So whether you want it to be, you know, a product for your own use, or if you actually want to go to sell your product, you can actually use these models for free. I'll show you how to import them and use them. Alright guys, let's get started. So it's not going to be too much work today in terms of the logic. We're just going to have to do a lot of the animation setup. But there's a few things we need to cover because I'm going to be making a few changes so that these things are easier for us. So we had our first-person character before, and this is what our first-person character looks like. They have all this stuff where it's like the first-person gun, and then the VR stuff, and the arms, and the camera. And we had logic in here for, you know, all this different logic. The equip text, creating the HUD, switching the weapons and what it looks like. Well, that's good, but what I decided to do was actually just make a new character. Yes, I could do everything there, but I wanted to create a new character. I actually duplicated the one that we had and called it BaseCharacter BP off of the FPS tutorial character class. So just to be completely clear, this first-person character is the one that comes with the first-person shooter template. It is stored in first-person CPP blueprints, and it is this one. You can go ahead and duplicate this, or, like I said, you can use this. I made a new one, just because I like changing things to be like BaseCharacter BP and things like that. To me, it's easier. And also, I wanted to have another one to mess around with in case I ever needed to go back, in case I didn't need to adjust the mesh or animations for the second character, like the character that we don't see while we're inside the body. And if you duplicate it, you should get everything that the other one had. The one that we already worked on had. I did not add any logic to any of this. So if you want to see what all this is, it's all within previous episodes, so you should have it at this point. Basically, this is nothing that you'll need for today's episode, though. The other things you might not have are these interface functions, which I covered earlier in the series. Just real quick to get those, you just go to class settings, go to implemented interface, and add the interface. And for me, I call it the HUD notify interface. So if you call it the same thing, just add that, and then type in these event names. Okay, that's how you get all the data back. And then now for the mesh, we had the mesh 1P that looks like this. But I went ahead and added another mesh, a skeletal mesh component. Add component, skeletal mesh right here. And then if you click on that skeletal mesh, you can drag it. So normally it'll be like here, which will be right in front of the camera. You can drag it all the way out here or something like that, just so you can see what's going on. You don't have to, but instead of like going to this and unpossessing and checking it out, to me, it was just easier to put it in front of my camera. It follows everything that my camera and character does, but now I can see it the whole time. Up to you. We're going to need to put our anim BP on it that we make, which we haven't made yet. Go ahead and put your skeletal mesh on the correct mesh that you want. Again, mine is called YBot, but you can use whatever you want. There is something else here that's important. You probably won't use it today, because again, the whole point of today is to show you what we can do with this. But if you go to rendering on the mesh, you can go to something called owner no see, or only owner see. In this case, this is an owner no see type of thing. So owner no see makes it so the owner does not see the object. Now, because it's in front of the character like this, you can see that sometimes my shots don't go anywhere. They're actually colliding with the character. Just so you know, the owner no see does not make them impossible to be interacted with. So my bullets are still hitting it, and that will be fixed when we adjust the character's mesh. But if you see that, that's what's going on. But you can make them invisible, and this is basically how it'll work. It'll be, this is invisible for the player, and the first person view is invisible for the other players, which is only owner see. That's how that works. Now, you can do all this without having arms and a skeletal mesh. Like, you don't have to have two meshes on a character to make a first-person shooter work, even with the scenarios I gave before. But if you don't do that, you do have to really be good with your camera work here, because this camera has one location that it can be. So say I try and place the mesh in front of the camera to line up with the arms. Then this is good, but you see, depending on where I look, I could have possible clipping issues like this. So you can do this. This won't really hurt anything. You won't have collision, and the owner won't be able to see it. But sometimes the collision can be a little bit off if you're not careful. Regardless, we are going to need to have a separate asset in front of the camera to represent the arms and the weapons. So even if we don't need a mesh that has any logic or anything like that, we do need to have logic to have it play certain animations and things on it. So you're going to have a mesh component, a skeletal mesh component for the arms and for the mesh anyway, or you're going to have one like this that has basically the bones separated using some blend poses and layered blend per pose logic, which I covered in a previous episode right here, but it's not relevant to today, so don't get stressed over that. It's just if you want to take a look ahead of time. Alright, so now we have our character in place, and this is good. That's pretty much it for this part. But remember, we have to give this mesh an AnimBP so that they can perform animations. So let's do that. Go add new, animation blueprint. And I called mine BaseCharacter AnimBP. Logic here is quite simple, but we are going to copy it from the arms that we have. So there's a first person AnimBP right here. And this is what was controlling what our arms look like. Now I put a weapon in the hands on the skeleton just as like a preview thing. It's by no means necessary. You can also easily remove it if you did it and you don't want it. Basically, if you don't want the rifle here anymore, you can click on the socket where it's at and remove all attached assets. It won't get rid of your socket, so you can still attach things in game, but then it doesn't show up in the preview anymore. And if you want it to reflect here, you'll have to close the AnimBP or refresh it, and there you go. Now here's what's in the event graph for that. It's event blueprint update animation, try get pawn owner is valid, and then it sets is moving and is in air. This is all stuff that came default with this template. I did not change it. I did not add anything throughout the tutorial series. So you will have this too, as long as you're using the first-person shooter template when you made your project. But if not, you can add all these nodes manually. It's not a big deal. I went ahead and copied this section. Control-C or right-click copy. And then I went to my BaseCharacter AnimBP and pasted it in. Control-V or right-click, paste here. I cleaned it up because I hate the way that it looks initially. So everything is the same here except for this character reference thing, and I've also changed the variable. The last variable that was being set. I'll show you why. But then I've added a few other things. So paste that, clean it up if you want. I basically just made it so it was all in a straight line as opposed to like all these different layers where it's like some is up here and then some is down below and some is up above. That's just really ugly to me. So I put it in a line. And again, I'll cover this in a second. This is still the same. And then when we were setting the speed, or the is moving before, I changed it to a speed. And basically, instead of getting like a value off this length to see if it was greater than a certain value or see if we were moving, I got the velocity, I got the vector length, and I set it. Now what's important here is I'm calling this movement speed because this is your total velocity. And if you do that, then you won't be able to, you know, you might not want to run at the speed that you have here. This is your movement speed. So if you get forced back by something, that's how fast you're moving. It's not like your walk speed or your run speed or anything like that. So I specifically called it movement speed. This will be important for when we're determining like how fast animations go down the road, because we can play them based off of variables, and we want them to play based off of variables that look good and make the animations line up well with them. This is just a little thing. Now, this character reference thing. Basically, in all my AnimBPs and all my series, the way I access a character is, basically the standard way to do it is to try and get pawn owner, just like we did here where they were checking if it was valid, cast it to your character type, and then use that. So I just set it to be a reference here if the cast succeeds. And then we can use this in the state machine to grab certain variables from it, like if we're reloading or sprinting, and then we can use those to go into different animations. So type try get pawn owner, like that, and then drag off of that and cast it to your character type. So remember, we just made base character BP, so that's what we want. And then you can drag off of this cast and say promote to variable. And then rename it to be whatever you want. I called mine character reference. And I did this on event blueprint begin play. You might already have this in your anim BP when you open it up, but if you don't, it's as simple as typing begin play. It'll come up. And basically what I do is this event blueprint update animation is basically a tick function within the animation blueprint. So this can run before begin play, and it often does. So instead of just setting the character reference here, I just make sure that the character reference is not valid, cast it to the base character BP, and then set the character reference. I literally drag, if it's not valid by the time we're trying to get to this node, then I just drag it directly into the logic to set the character reference. Now the reason this works, all we're doing is trying to get the pawn owner here. Well, we already check if the pawn owner is valid in the tick function here. So if it's already valid, we know this cast will work as long as we're casting to the proper type here, and thus we can keep a reference to it. And since this will happen on the first tick, the first update, then we know for sure that it'll be valid in the state machine as well, where we need to use it. So those are the changes I made in the event graph. I do have something else here which won't make sense until we get into the state machine, so let's get into that. Now you'll probably have this anim graph here to get started, this output pose, and you might have a state machine here already in. What I did is I use a state machine to set up some logic, but I keep the feet and the movement different. That way I can say reload while I'm walking and things like that. So I'm walking, I can still reload while I'm walking. I don't have like a reload and walk animation. I just have a walk animation, or rather a walk blend space, but I can reload while I'm doing that. Or I can aim down sights, and I can walk while I aim down sights too. It doesn't look the best because they're just Miximo animations, and honestly they're not really intended the way I'm using them, just because I grabbed them from different characters. But the way we do this, you'll have your state machine already in your anim graph when you load the anim EP. We need to make a blend space for you to be able to use this in this method. So first of all, call your state machine whatever you want. You can click on it and rename it. If whatever it's called by default is fine for you, then perfect. I called my default state machine just in case I need to have more than one. Sometimes that is useful. And then we made a blend space, so let me go to that. Okay. Now, I have a video all about blend spaces that I made the other day, and I said that I would link it in the other iCard, but actually I'll probably link it here, to be honest, because I think it's more useful here where we're actually using this stuff. But I will go over it very quickly. Basically, right-click and go to Animation and pick Blend Space 1D. This means that our animation and basically the speed or what kind of animation we're blending between will depend on one variable, one dimension. That's what 1D stands for. Name it whatever you want. I called it Ybot Move Blend Space 1D. So BS1D. When you go into this, you'll have this thing called horizontal axis. And you'll have this graph down at the bottom. Open up horizontal axis, and this will determine your minimum and maximum value on this graph at the bottom. You can see 0 to 600, like I put here. And then you'll have a name for this. The name I called walk speed. You could just call it speed if you want. This is going to be, basically we're going to put in our walking and running animations, and we're going to blend between them based on our movement speed that we set in our anim BP. So the way this works is you can drag an animation just directly in to this graph. I've already done it, so I'm not going to do it again. But the green pin is your preview. So I brought in idle and put it at 0. So I moved idle, put it all the way over here. You can move them after they are in. So it tells you the animation, Ybot walk, Ybot idle. You can move them after. You can move them to these different pin locations. Walk speed 0 means we're idle, we're standing still. If our walk speed reaches a different variable, such as 149, 150, then we're playing the complete Ybot walk animation. And you can see that he starts walking very slowly as we're approaching the speed. So if we have a controller and we're just barely pressing the joystick, we can see that difference. And then as we get faster, we go all the way into a running stance at 600. That's how our blend space is set up. And basically we're going to blend only the feet here as much as we can. Only basically the spine down, part of the bottom of the spine down. That way we can combine the running with the other actions we're doing, like aiming down sights or reloading. So remember, we have walk speed as the name here. So let's grab our blend space. If we go back into our NMBP, you can type in the blend space name, Ybot moves BS1D, whatever yours is called. And it will come up as blend space player. Click that one, and I'll ask you to put in something for walk speed. I brought in my movement speed variable that we set up earlier in the event graph. And now I have my state machine and I have my blends placed. Now the only thing I have to do at this point is blend them together. That way I can get my state machine working and my bones below the spine, you know, at the bottom of the spine, using the blend space. So we need this thing called layer blend per bone. Now you can just search for this right here. And everything that you have here is good. It can stay the same. You're going to pass in your blend space to the top, the base pose, and your blend pose to the state machine. You can technically do it the other way too. I just am used to doing it that way from a project I had to do it on. But there you go. Okay, then you click on your layered blend per bone, and you'll have something like this where you see layered setup. I can't remember if it's open by default or not, but you can click it to open it, click to open 0, and then you'll have branch filters, which should have 0 elements in it. Add one, and then it will give you 0, like it'll give you another entry here. And then you'll have 2 members. You'll have bone name and bone depth. So bone name is the bone you want to basically cut the skeleton off at and separate the logic. For me, spine is pretty much the closest to the bottom of the spine on the Miximo as I can. You don't want to pick hips, even if it's lower, just because hips is the root of everything. So if I pick spine and I close spine, then all these things are going to be adjusted. But if I pick hips, then everything belongs there. So it won't work quite how we want. But spine is probably good for the Miximo animation. It is case sensitive, so the bone name you have to put spine. And then for blend depth, I always put 1, and then just drag the outcome into your output pose, and you're done with that. Now, in your default state machine, we have to fill out this logic as well, and this is how we can get our reload, our aim down sights, and our shoot, as they all have different animations that we play. Okay, so we start with entry. Let's go ahead and make all 4 states here, idle included. Right click and add state. Call it idle, aim down sights, reload, and shoot. Then go into each state, put in your animation. So for idle, I put Ybot idle. I make sure it's looping, and it looks like this. Then I can go to aim down sights. I make sure it's not looping. And it looks like that. Then I have reload, which is not looping, and it looks like this. Note that I call this generic reload We can do another blend space technique when we have different guns and we want the reload to be different to play a different animation. So this is the generic reload. Maybe it's the first weapon reload or just a temporary asset for now. And then I have shoot, which is going to be generic shoot as well. It is going to be looping because we're going to essentially tell it to stop once we release the button. Or if it's, say, a single fire gun or something like that, then we can force the boolean back to be false so that he stops shooting. But we do want it to loop by chance. And again, this can be set per weapon. That's why I call it generic shoot. So some weapons can be loop, some animations can be loop and some cannot. And now once you have those up, all we have to do is set up our transition rules. Basically, from idle to aim down sights, I have the boolean is aim down sights. Now, if you're familiar with this series and you've been watching it the whole time, I used to call this boolean is zoomed in. And that worked for, like, it looked like we were literally, well, we were just literally zooming in when we were right-clicking. But since we have animations now, and we're going to start lining it up with the actual guns and the weapons, I decided to change the name from is zoomed in to is aim down sights everywhere in my code. You can do a find and replace to do this. If you do Control F, hit the little arrow to get replace, and do is zoomed in. You can see it's not finding anything more for me right now. And then type in the bottom what you want to replace it with is aim down sights. Click the farthest right middle button, replace all, and then it will replace is zoomed in to is aim down sights. And at that point, this is the boolean I'm using here. You have to grab it from your character reference that we made, so you can drag your character reference on, drag off of it, is aim down sights, and then drag that into the result. Basically, whenever we go from idle to aim down sights, and this boolean is true, this animation will play, so we'll be playing the aim down sights animation. And then to return, all I do is the opposite. Character reference is aim down sights, and then I drag off of this and type not. So if we're not aiming down sights, then we return to idle. For reload, it's very similar. I added a new boolean called is reloading. This wasn't actually here before. We were just reloading off of a timer, and actually we were just reloading and applying the logic right then and there. We're going to start doing it off of a timer based on weapon reload times. So add a boolean in your character. I basically copied everything from the other booleans and made it is reloading. Make sure it's a U property so we can access it in Blueprint. And you can go into your CPP and you can set your default values. So is reloading as false. And then whenever we actually reload, I'm going to set it to true. Reload weapon. Manual reload. And all we're doing is setting it to true. We don't need to set it back to false here yet. We might do it through a timer based on the weapon reload time. But for now, and honestly throughout the entire series, you can actually just do it based on the length of the animation. So the way I have this working is I have it returning by default. I have it automatic rule based to go back from reload to idle with no state in here. So idle to reload has character references reloading. But reload to idle doesn't have anything. What it does have, if you click on this transition rule, is a start transition event. And I've typed it in called end reload and hit enter. Once you do this, you can go into your event graph and then grab this event. You just type it in, end reload. And make sure you grab the event one. It'll put you here, and then I can grab the character reference and say set is reloading. Like that. And then leave it as false. So basically, once this animation is done, then we're no longer reloading. And then it won't continuously loop reload, idle, reload, idle, reload, idle. It'll just go idle to reload, and then reload is done, so we return to idle. Lastly, we have idle to shoot, which is a boolean is shooting. It's a boolean I already had because we were using it for when we were doing automatic guns and things like that. So just use your character reference, grab is shooting, and to come back from that state, just grab your character reference, is shooting not. You can go back from shoot to idle. And that's about it for today's episode, guys. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for the channel and more for the series than anything else you can do, and it's completely free. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon subscribers and supporters. Thank you guys so much for believing in me and continuing to help me make these videos. I love making them, so I really appreciate it. If you had any issues with this tutorial, feel free to join the Discord community to get some support. And lastly, if you want to come watch programming live streams or come hang out with me and ask me questions, we do live streams on this channel every Friday, 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I also have the Shawnthebro 27 YouTube channel and Twitch channel where we do gaming streams if you want to check those out and have fun. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.